In the shadows of the Third Reich, far from the roar of tanks and artillery, another war was unfolding. Not a war of armies, a war of ideology, science, and secrecy. Behind barbed wire and concrete walls, prisoners were forced into freezing water, exposed to disease, and subjected to experiments that defied both medicine and morality. At the center of it all stood one man, quiet, methodical, and disturbingly convinced he was shaping the future. This is the hidden story of Heinrich Himmler and the secret experiments carried out under his authority. By the late 1930s, the Nazi regime had consolidated total control over Germany. But within that regime, a parallel power structure emerged. Himmler's SS was not merely a paramilitary force. It was an ideological machine, responsible for intelligence, racial policy, internal security, and the vast network of concentration camps. As Reichsführer SS, Himmler answered directly to Adolf Hitler. Yet in many ways, he operated independently, creating what historians describe as a state within a state. Under his command, the SS expanded its authority into science and medicine, twisting both to serve racial ideology and military ambition. Himmler was not a battlefield general. He was an administrator, obsessed with ancestry charts, bloodlines, and pseudoscientific theories about racial purity. He believed the SS represented a biological elite destined to reshape Europe. To support this worldview, he funded institutes dedicated to racial research and occult history, including the Nuremberg Society. Officially, it was a research institute. In reality, it became a vehicle for ideological experimentation. But ideology alone was not enough. War created opportunity. And opportunity, in Himmler's mind, justified anything. As the war intensified, concentration camps became more than prisons. They became laboratories. At camps such as Dachau concentration camp, SS doctors conducted experiments supposedly designed to aid the German military. One series of experiments tested how long a human body could survive in freezing water. Prisoners were submerged in ice baths while doctors recorded their body temperature and time to unconsciousness. Others were placed in low-pressure chambers to simulate high-altitude conditions for Luftwaffe pilots. Many suffered seizures, brain damage, or death. These were not rogue actions. They were authorized. Reports were sent up the chain of command, including to Himmler. In camps such as Auschwitz concentration camp, experiments expanded into infectious diseases. Prisoners were deliberately infected with malaria, typhus, and tuberculosis. The stated purpose was vaccine development. The methods were brutal, unregulated, and often fatal. One SS physician became particularly notorious, Josef Mengele. At Auschwitz, Mengele conducted experiments on twins, attempting to unlock genetic secrets that aligned with Nazi racial theories. Children were measured, injected, and dissected under the guise of science. While Mengele became infamous, he operated within a system that Himmler oversaw and encouraged. Himmler personally expressed interest in certain experimental outcomes. In correspondence, he requested updates on results, especially those that could enhance military survival or prove racial doctrines. Among the most documented atrocities were the hypothermia experiments at Dachau. Prisoners were forced into freezing water outdoors during winter. Some were left naked in sub-zero temperatures. Doctors observed how long it took for them to die. Himmler reportedly showed particular interest in methods to rewarm hypothermia victims, hoping to improve survival rates for downed German pilots in the North Sea. The logic was chillingly bureaucratic. If suffering could produce data, then suffering was acceptable. Thousands perished in the name of military research. For years after the war, some attempted to portray Himmler as distant from specific atrocities. But post-war documentation revealed otherwise. Captured SS files and testimonies presented at the Nuremberg trial showed that Himmler received reports on medical experiments and approved their continuation. He visited camps. He spoke to doctors. He framed experimentation as a necessary sacrifice for the Reich. The image of a detached administrator collapses under scrutiny. Himmler was not unaware. He was architect and overseer. As Germany's defeat became inevitable in 1945, Himmler made a desperate move. Without Hitler's knowledge, he attempted to negotiate surrender terms with Western allies through intermediaries in neutral Sweden. He hoped to position himself as a transitional leader, perhaps even a useful anti-Soviet partner. It was a miscalculation. When Hitler learned of Himmler's unauthorized contact attempts, he he declared him a traitor. The loyal executor of Nazi racial policy was suddenly cast out. In May 1945, disguised and attempting to flee, Himmler was captured by British forces. During a medical examination, he bit down on a concealed cyanide capsule. He died within minutes. There would be no public trial, no full cross-examination of his role in the experiments, no complete accounting from his own voice. Instead, history would reconstruct the evidence from documents, survivors, and the ruins of the camps themselves. The revelations of medical experimentation shocked even hardened investigators. At the doctor's trial in Nuremberg, several physicians were prosecuted for crimes against humanity. Out of those proceedings emerged the Nuremberg Code, a foundational set of ethical principles for human experimentation, emphasizing voluntary consent and medical necessity. It was born from atrocity. The secret experiments authorized under Himmler's authority reshaped international medical ethics forever. They serve as a permanent warning of what happens when ideology replaces humanity and when science is stripped of moral restraint. Himmler often described himself as practical, disciplined, and rational, but the system he created was neither rational nor scientific. It was driven by fanaticism disguised as research. The camps were not accidents of war. They were extensions of belief. The experiments were not anomalies. They were policy. In the silence of abandoned laboratories and frozen barracks, the records remain, not as data, not as discovery, but as evidence. And history remembers that when power abandons conscience, even science can become a weapon.